Hello, and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co host, Nathan Rittenhouse. In this episode, we make a distinction between defending Christianity and being a defensive Christian. One of those is biblical and Christ like, and one of those shows some weakness in the way in which we think about and conceptualize what it means to be a Christian. So we want to balance those out. I think you'll find this helpful. I found it helpful to re articulate these things as we go along and think about our broad posture as Christians toward the world around us. Don't forget, you can share, like, subscribe, pass this information along to people who like it. You can support what we do and find out more about who we are at toltogether.com.
So, defending Christianity is a good thing. Now, I would say that. Nathan and I are frontline apologists, but defending Christianity is a good thing. Being a defensive Christian, on the other hand, is a bad thing. And I'd like to explore
Dun,
the
dun,
difference.
dun.
Dun, dun, dun. I'd like to
Here.
explore the difference between those two real quickly. Let me just say just a few words about defending. Let me defending for a second. Defending Christianity is good. Now, somebody will invariably always say, "Oh, God doesn't need you to defend him." Yes, that's true. He does not. But on the other hand, we have many conversations, one hopes, with people who don't share our convictions or Christians who are shaky in their convictions and maybe have doubts. And so we are actually commanded by scripture to talk to people. Now, we're not commanded to all be philosophers and doctors and lawyers and scientists and public speakers or anything like that, but we are commanded to talk about these matters with people. And it's an act of intellectual service and servanthood to do so. So that's a
We're not
good thing.
we're not defending God, we're defending our belief in God. Maybe is a distinction to make there.
That's a good way to put it. Right. Because of God, of course, God, if he doesn't indeed exist, which we both believe he does, he's the supreme Lord of all creation. Yes, he obviously needs no defense, but he also doesn't need us to pray to him. But we need to pray because it is good for us. So defending God is also good for us, and it helps other people as well. It's a wonderful discipline. It can strengthen and deepen your own faith as you're pressing deeper into it in your work to defend it. Imagine that.
Well,
So all
but
sorts
also
of
Christian defense is different than like a nation defending its border, and that Christian defense is always done in the context of an invitation. So it's not defending as in trying to keep something out. It's actually postured differently in that it is part of holding the door open in a unique way. So just want to throw that in there so
yes.
we don't have the wrong connotation of defense.
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, and that is important. I mean, just to set us up on the right footing. So, but by no means are we saying, or anybody else who is in favor of defending Christianity, that it is up to us to be the ones who defend God and that he needs us, is dependent on us in any way. That is not the case. But I think most people, that is probably not their line of thinking
Mhm.
when they hear when they hear the phrase defending Christianity. But defensiveness is a bad thing. And here I think we could spend a little bit of time. And where I want to start, Nathan, is for the last probably 100 years or so, maybe a little bit more, ever since the dawn of serious unbelief, Christianity has largely been seen to be on the back foot. That is, we have to be on the defensive. Now, you've heard this before, Nathan. I hear it so much. You are a Christian. You're claiming that, that God created us and the universe and everything in it. So the burden of proof is on you. That's an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so I'll sit back and watch you defend yourself. So let me pause there for a second. I'd like us to sort of press into that because I think this is a false dilemma, and I think we need to expose it a little bit.
Well, I think I mean it's been I don't know sometime last year perhaps I pointed out sort of the funny it's like it's like it's kind of like saying to you Cameron, Why do you grow hair on your head?" Like, why aren't you why don't you shave your head? As if having your head shaved is the normal position. Like, you probably don't wake up in the morning and now, I'm sure there are people listening to this to shave their head, and I'm not making a statement about that at all. I'm just saying that which question is normal is what we're talking about here. By and large, most humans grow hair on top of their heads. And so we don't go around to every single person who has hair on the top of their head and say, "Why do you grow hair on your head?" Just because that's kind of assumed to be part of what it means to be human. When we come to like, well, you have this ludicrous belief that you think there's a God. That's sort of like walking around expecting everybody to be bald. It's the tables have been turned here in a funny little way of like, no, that's not actually the normal human experience. So let's just put that out there as whether or not it's a false dilemma. It's a bit of a interesting question. Just in if you zoom out beyond your own little microcosm of the world and look at the broader understanding historically and the massive majority opinion globally right now of what it means to be human, a belief in the divine or something bigger than ourselves is not. It you see what I'm saying there? Like, I don't want to say it's arrogant, but it is a very
Oh,
um, a question that
yes.
lacks awareness, I think, of yourself if you're the one who's surprised to find that the majority of people in the world and the
Let me
majority of
chime in
people
there.
in the world internationally have believed in a god, gods, goddesses, whatever.
You're being very nice. So it's not necessarily arrogant, but it often is.
Okay.
So on the so let me qualify that. Okay, if you are subscribing to, if you're more in a sort of mild-mannered camp and you say, "I think it's exceedingly unlikely that there is a God," we'll talk about how that is a phrase that so there's an interesting juxtaposition that's happening here. What you just said is true. The vast majority of the human race have affirmed the existence of a higher power of some kind down the ages and continue to do so. That hasn't changed. So it is the majority position. I can hear some critics, shrieking, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You're right, it doesn't. But it does mean, though, that if we blithely just dismiss it as all a bunch of stupidity and arrogance, and or no, so all a bunch of stupidity and ignorance, rather, that itself is a highly dismissive attitude.
So
And
it's not
yes,
a
that
proof
is
at all,
arrogant.
but it should give us pause and should give us a little bit of epistemic humility, I think, to say
Yes,
the probability of my extreme minority position being the one that is obviously right, go easy.
right. You should be more circumspect at the very least. But now let me add to that also. When people will say, still in conversations with me, and I know this happens to you still, Nathan, if you venture out of the comfort zone a little bit, as many of you listeners do, I'm sure when you're talking to non-believers, you still will hear these sound bites. Well, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever for Christianity. That itself is a silly claim. There is a vast intellectual tradition that represents some of the finest minds ever who have argued vigorously for the existence of God and who have given us amazing thought on the matter. That doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Okay, no, it doesn't. But again, all we're doing right now is we're just providing evidence for why the dismissive attitude is actually unreasonable in and of itself. So if you've got Aquinas, if you've got Augustine, you've got John Milton, you got Shakespeare, and on we go. You got Alvin Plantinga, you got Nicholas Woltersdorf. We can just keep going. G.E. Anscombe. If you have some of these people, and so I'm trying to name some modern voices too. Well, if Aquinas were living today, he would have outgrown those beliefs. I can hear somebody saying, "Well, that's an impossibly speculative and probably silly thing to say as well." But there are modern examples of extremely astute, very brilliant thinkers who continue to maintain this and provide vigorous argument for it. So to say there's no evidence whatsoever or there's no proof whatsoever is again just a statement of
I,
ignorance, speaking
I'm,
purely descriptively, because it's not the case.
I'm chuckling here. Cameron, have you seen the Lutheran satire YouTube videos? I mean,
Come on, Patrick.
come on, Patrick. So the one on the Trinity is by far the most popular, and
Classic.
I'll try to post one. My kids think these are hilarious. The one where so the two little Irish cartoon characters, the one where they talk to Richard Dawkins, um,
Oh,
where
that you showed me that one years ago. It's great.
well, because basically its point is like, okay, they conclude there is no proof for the resurrection if you discount all the proofs for the resurrection, or like there are no examples of resurrection if you take away all the examples of resurrection.
Right. So
Um,
if you bat away every piece of evidence, well, there's absolutely no evidence. But
so
here's another thing, Neith.
I'll
Just
try to
bring
find
it
that. I'll try
to
to find
find
that and
it.
post it in Connect. Yeah.
But just to bring it into this corner of the conversation, so there's that we're talking about this extreme dismissiveness, this arrogant dismissiveness that is very characteristic of certain little elite sectors in the West. But another aspect of that would be you get to a place with certain people where it very quickly becomes apparent that no amount of evidence or no proof, in quotes, would qualify for them. In other words, whatever you provide or whatever was provided, whatever was forthcoming from God himself would never be enough. So an example would be somebody like Professor Richard Dawkins or some of the other people in this kind of new atheist camp would say, if the Lord wrote in the sky, "Richard Dawkins, you are my most wondrous creation. Take a look and you will find deposited in your bank 20 million pounds." Or whatever. So, but they would say, and they're on record as saying, some of these people, well, yeah, but that could have been an extraterrestrial
Yeah.
super intelligence that was playing a trick on me. So it very quickly becomes, not with everybody, but some of them, that no matter what evidence, even the most extravagant evidence wouldn't satisfy, they'd still find a way to call it into question.
Okay. I want to think about that statement because I also think your name written in the sky and money showing up in your bank isn't a good proof of the
Oh,
existence of God.
I think it's a terrible proof. I'm
That's
using
like
it
the
just as
low. Yeah.
I think
So
I'm using it just as an example of the kind of demands that will be made
right.
by
Yeah.
certain not unbelievers. Well, I
Even
think
even
another way. Yeah.
even if you could get God to jump through your hoops, you wouldn't believe in that God.
Exactly. So I was gonna, yeah, the word I was gonna use there is, so then God is basically, if he complies with that, he's not behaving at all like the God of Scripture. He's behaving like the cosmic butler or the
Mhm.
grandfather in the sky or the sky daddy that Freud and Feuerbach are so powerful to in their objections of. So
Okay, so hang on.
right.
This is important that we turn the corner here because let's talk about defensive Christianity then. If it is true, Cameron, that there's this um, weight, momentum, historical, traditional, revelatory bulk of the infusion of God's presence and spirit into the world, how do we get this defensive posture among Christians? What's happening there?
I think, well, I mean, a lot could be said there, but basically, if you want to put it in sort of very concise terms, Christians often accept I mean, they concede too much in some of these discussions. And I think apologetics as a discipline can be vulnerable to this because there's an intense desire to meet the critic on her own terms. But sometimes the whole framework in which these terms are offered is false in the first place. So, for instance, what we were just saying, if you're demanding a certain type of proof that would be completely out of character for the living God in the first place, then what you have to do is first of all show, look, the very demands you're making for this kind of proof, write my name in the sky, reveal yourself unassailably to me. I mean, and of course, Pascal addresses this one too. If God, well, the Lord could make it so that you couldn't deny him. Yeah, he could. And if he does that, he completely erases all your free will and just completely overwhelms you and overrides you. Could he do that? Yes, but he doesn't. So we have to allow for the possibility, if Christianity is true, that he has ordained it such that he wants to be sought. Now he's given ample evidence. There is powerful evidence. I mean, in the created order, scripture teems with verses on this from the Psalms and Romans. He's revealed himself decisively to us in his son Jesus Christ. I mean,
S-
talk about meeting somebody where they're at.
Are
But
you are,
yeah.
are you subtly hinting here that if you run across somebody who's extremely defensive as a Christian, that might be an indicator that they themselves don't believe the core premises?
Yes.
Is
So
is it does it come out of a place of insecurity, I guess? Is that
I
where the
think the
defensiveness comes from?
I think the hallmark of defensiveness is insecurity. Yes. And so I think a lot of Christians, if they've gone into that defensive mode, will see opposing arguments as clear and present threats. And so that can lead us into all sorts of behavior. It can lead us into some people, it depends on your personality. Some people will become more belligerent and more
Mhm.
shrill and loud.
Yeah.
Other people will become more afraid and fearful, and they'll retreat, they'll bury their heads in the sand. Others will find ways to, without meaning to, they'll start to caricature positions, they'll create straw men. Because nothing communicates confidence, by the way, in a debate, for instance, or in a discussion, like giving the fairest, strongest representation to the opposition as you can, to give a steel man. That
Mm.
communicates amazing confidence. If you do that, it means that you're in no way threatened by the opposing view. And I guess part of what I want to do here, Nathan, is to show Christians not everybody needs to be, in the forefront of these discussions or on the cutting edge or speaking in public settings or anything like that. Some of us are called to that, some of us aren't, and that's okay. But if you are, it's also helpful to back up a little bit and see that the secular framework is itself, it's a specific plausibility structure that doesn't obtain for absolutely everybody. So, I mean, in certain narrow university corridors and among the scientific community in certain places, it's taken as a given that we don't need God. He's at best irrelevant. We don't need him for any kind of material explanations. And to make an appeal to him is to hide from scientific progress and all of the evidence and just retreat to sort of blind speculation and all of that. But the extravagant claim, I think our friend and colleague Vince Vitale here, our old colleague, was real helpful on this one. You say extravagant, claims require extravagant evidence. The claim that God exists that's an extravagant claim. Well, why is there anything at all? I mean, that the something rather than nothing is itself extravagant in the sense that how did it all get here? And not only is it just this bland all, it's an incredibly textured, complex, and intricate all that exists. How did that all come into being? And there you can have some, I think, very productive conversations. But it's just to know that Christians believe what we believe is not outlandish, any more outlandish than believing that somehow everything came about from nothing or from random unguided process or the multiverse theory, which is probably one of the most speculative
Yeah,
theories out
we
there.
could go down a long rabbit trail on that, but I want to loop back around to maybe part of the confusion is on what it means to believe. In that, when somebody says they believe in Christ, perhaps historically there was a point in which you had no other option other than to believe that thing. And so it was an inherited, non-examined belief. But I don't think like that ship has sailed a long time ago. And so to say you believe is a choice among options. Well, I
Yes.
mean, I know options is a little bit crude there, but I'm saying it's
Sure.
not
No, it
like
is though. Yeah.
it's not like I'm saying I didn't have any other avenue before me of a way to see the world. And so by default, I was just left with this one and now everybody's attacking it, so I have to defend it. If you come to a critical, judiciously discerned understanding, and again, this is on God's part in his revelation, and response to that, you've kind of you've done the doubting before you believed. So it's weird to me to run into a category of Christians who believed, and then it feels like they come across defensively because they aren't quite sure what it is that they actually believe. It I, I'm not quite sure that I'm fully on board with what I'm saying here, but I'm poking at something that seems to account for,
Well,
I think, the defensiveness that we see of um
let me. Yeah.
like I've evaluated something for 20 years and I'm sticking with it. Therefore, I'm moving
Uh-huh.
forward in this way is very different than here's something I got from my grandma and now I have to justify its use in the world.
Well, it depends on, of course, there are different factors of your upbringing, your geography, and all of that. It the kind of unselfconscious Christianity of the past is not possible anymore. And some of our best social thinkers and philosophers have been pointing to this for a long time. I think Charles Taylor at greatest length. You know that when if you hold your Christian convictions, once you reach a certain age, and I mean, it's younger and younger, you're conspicuously aware that, gosh, I have a classmate who's a Buddhist. I have somebody else who's, people believe different things. And you know that you're believing in Christianity, you hold to Christianity to the exclusion of all of these other things. So there's that factor. There's also the factor, though, that in higher education circles or elite sectors in Western culture, the default setting is secularism of some form or another. Now, there's a spectrum there, of course, but it's secular. So I want to just point that out. That's a default setting as well,
Oh,
and plenty of people actually drift into secularism unthinkingly as well. That is uncritically. Because what happens is you have people who are either raised in that milieu, and I mean, so in other words, this is the same. It's a double-edged sword. You're just a Christian because you were raised a Christian. Well, there are plenty of people who came from atheist households who stay in that milieu and
hmm.
that group as well. But there are plenty of people who go into they leave
You could
Christianity.
now say you're just an atheist because your algorithm is.
Right, precisely. But yeah, you go into again, I think the concept of a plausibility structure is incredibly helpful here. A kind of a sort of framework that stabilizes and grounds all your beliefs and your convictions. So if you're in a framework that is predominantly secular in nature, then you're gonna be in that environment, and those assumptions are just going to make sense because they're reinforced everywhere by everyone in that place. This is why sometimes it's really interesting to watch, say, an atheist in a debate with a very informed Christian, and they look like a fish out of water. You can see Christians do this too, of course, when they're among atheists because they're out of their plausibility structure. They're not surrounded by a kind of, they're not preaching to the choir now. And suddenly they're hearing an informed person from a completely different position who did not come to their convictions thoughtlessly. And it can be a shock to the system. So I'm not sure that we're helping much here. Just saying that, the the
No, I think
framework of secularism is itself a very powerful thing, and plenty of people just drift into it because it's just reinforced around them.
can we reverse engineer this a second, Cameron, and talk about what
Mm,
confidence looks like?
mhm.
Because I think that is the opposite of defensiveness here, and I do think there is harm done by defensive Christians. A in in the PR of Christianity of like, oh great, you believe this thing that you think gives you a deep sense of satisfaction and stability in your life. You believe in the resurrection of the dead, that God is sovereign and supreme and has a plan for your life, and you are spazzing out on social media over
Yeah.
some political minutia. Like those things don't fit together.
Mm,
And so it's bad advertising from the outside looking in. It's not healthy for the individual who's involved in it. Um, and so the stakes are high here in that sense. I think what ends up happening is that the secular ideas that we assume do tend toward we're all victims. It's what Marilyn Robinson said. One of the interesting things, and this is way before like all woke conversation, all that. She said one of the interesting things about American culture is that any group can legitimately see itself as a minority, and so you can frame um, all of reality as everybody against me or my little group. Anybody can do this. It could be um, straight white men with beards. That's a minority. So any little group you
yeah.
can identify and find a minority any way that you want. Um, and so this idea of everybody is against me, I'm the victim, easily can be adopted by the church and by Christians, and it's just not what we're really talking about here. If you have your head screwed on correctly and understanding whose you are and how you operate in the world. And so that defensiveness, um, I went to a Mennonite church for a while when I was in college, and really some great teaching and friendships, lifelong friendships there. But one sermon that stood out, I've quoted this before, is the guy who was preaching on. He's like, "Oh, Christians are like, oh, everybody's persecuting me, nobody likes me, out to get me." And he's like, that could be because you're a Christian, or it could be because you're an annoying person. Yeah, and so there's a sense in
Yeah.
which our defensiveness or our or the way in which we engage the world just is obnoxious. And so people don't like you not because you're Christian, but because you're an annoying version of it that I think has that unsettled, defensive, everything is wrong with everybody, everywhere, all the time, and all I can see is what's critically wrong and broken, and it's bad. Um, and
Yeah.
that posture is not reflective of what Christ taught or embodied or promises to give his followers.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say this and sort of by way of conclusion, this is a I mean, this is a kind of a roving conversation and we'll need to explore it again. Gosh, is it can we get through a podcast where we don't say that at the end? We're becoming so predictable. Anyway,
It's
let me
to
do
stimulate you to wholesome thinking, not to give you all the answers
that's
or
right.
the
Let me think of
the
something
answer.
spontaneous to say here that anyway, here we go. But I want to say this. Look, maybe if what we're describing is you and you are more defensive in your posture, that's all right. Maybe take some time. And let me just this is just a word of encouragement. Maybe take some time before engaging. You know, we can take time. I think a big here I am repeating myself again. Well, there that goes. Bye-bye. Nothing spontaneous here, but a big problem in our culture is that there's relentless pressure to just constantly weigh in all the time, have an opinion on everything, and always be engaged. But it's okay to sit back sometimes and reflect. Now, there's a fine line between telling yourself that and then just going down a road of total inaction. If you never start, if you're afraid to just start, I mean, it's going to involve some awkward turns, twists and turns in conversations. You need to be willing to do that. But that said, to stand back and reflect a little bit and maybe look into it, do some studying of your own. Christianity stands up to scrutiny. And what's amazing right now is this is a moment where more and more prophetic voices are coming from outside the church and they are speaking words of encouragement to the church, saying, "Oh my goodness, do you even understand what you have? Look at this immense treasure trove of beauty, of values and ideas and love. I mean, wonderful visions of the human race and its place and meaning." Now, it's so much more than that, of course, but we're having, this is a moment where Christianity is kind of being rediscovered by
Mhm.
some major cultural voices, and that's a great word of encouragement. It's also a word of challenge to us to, yeah, recognize the beauty of what we have and the
Sure.
immense wealth, but
Let me give
it's
you
okay to slow down. Yeah,
let me give you a story to bring to wrap this up. So,
yeah.
there are a lot of things that I do, gardening, projects around the house or whatever, that I'll be watching some YouTube videos or something and discover this new way to do this. Like, "Oh, this is a cool way to grow onions," or whatever. And I'll do it, and then my grandpa will walk by at some point and be like, "Oh, yeah, that's how we used to do it when I was a kid." And you're like, "What?" Like, we thought we discovered this
Thought this was cutting edge, man.
we thought this was cutting edge, and I think the church has a little bit of that where, like, we have this deep, rich, beautiful tradition of a stability of a way of doing things, some of which has been forgotten, and we need some voices to remind us of, like, "Hey, here's a" and for a lot of people, it is totally fresh and totally new, but it's rooted in something much deeper, much longer. And so I think there's a stability and a confidence that comes from that that should put us in a posture of if we are operating from a place of deep peace
Mm,
and knowing whose
yeah.
we are, that God loves us, what his plan and his purpose is for humanity, then we engage the world out of a deep love and compassion, not out of fear and not out of anger, but out of sorrow for what could be and isn't being actualized in the lives of people around us because we're missing out on the peace that God promises. And that is a totally different framework. It's a totally different tone and it has a totally different level of impact on a world around us who needs to know that peace is possible in international chaos and conflict and in inter-country conflict in your state, your county, your town, and even in your own household. That a way of peace is possible, but we can't preach a message of peace from a frantic soul. And so this really does start with us, I think, as we think about what it means to give a reason for the hope that we have. It's rooted in the work that Christ has already done. The foundation's been laid, the house is built, the feast has been prepared. It's just an invitation game at this point. And so let's lean into that with confidence. I think this has been a helpful conversation for me, Cameron, to be reminded of that. And I know that will be true for many of you listening as well. So, this is not a time to be on your back foot as a Christian. This is a time to lean forward because that's what Christ calls us to do. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.